Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. My name is Jeff Pengelly. I'm the Community Development Director. This agenda item was also prepared in close coordination with our Oxnard Fire Department, specifically Chief Hamilton. This is a fire hazard severity zone map adoption item. For some background, the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, known as CAL FIRE, updated their statewide fire hazard severity zone maps. The goal of this map update effort was to identify areas in the state with elevated fire hazards due to wildfires. The most recent fire hazard mapping process incorporated new science into local climate data and utilized improved fire assessment modeling to categorize areas of the state into 4 possible hazard ratings, either no hazard, moderate high, or very high. As mentioned in the staff report, two key elements for the creation of these maps are the probability that an area will burn and the expected fire behavior under extreme fuel and weather conditions. Some other factors that are considered are the fire history of an area, the flame length of a potential burn, the terrain, local weather patterns, and potential fuel that exists over a 50-year period. Outside of the wildland areas, there are factors considered that include, again, the terrain, the weather, urban vegetation cover, glowing embers, the proximity to wildland of a specific neighborhood or urban area, fire history of the area or the adjoining wildlands, and again, the fire hazard that is expressed in nearby wildlands. As the staff report points out, it's critical to discuss that this maps that are published regarding fire hazard severity zones evaluate a hazard, not a risk. And in general, a hazard is based on the physical conditions that create a likelihood and an expected fire behavior over a long period of time, 30 to 50 years. And that does not consider mitigation measures that insurance companies might use, such as home hardening if there was a recent wildfire that burned out fuel, or if there are fuel reduction efforts in the area. Risk, however, is the potential damage that a fire can do, accounting for modifications such as fuel reduction, defensible space, and ignition-resistant building construction, if that technique has been employed. So risk is the factor or the term that is most appropriately used by insurance companies, and that's not what these fire hazard severity zone maps are intended to show. In fact, it's very unlikely that insurance risk models are specifically using these type of fire hazard severity zone maps as a factor that establishes directly insurance rates. Certainly, there are some underlying factors that are similar between the hazard maps presented here and the risk maps that insurance companies use. However, the insurance companies' risk models use many additional factors and methods, and their methods change much more frequently than these fire hazard severity zone maps. The bottom line is that insurance companies' risk modeling used to determine insurance rates and other coverage issues has likely already been factored into the insurance industry risk maps prior to the release of these most recent fire hazard severity zone maps. In other words, although the base factors might start off in the same with the same parameters as basic fuel loads and proximity to wildland areas, the insurance companies' risk maps use a lot more detailed information that these fire hazard severity zone maps do. And these maps that are being adopted as part of this agenda item are not driving insurance rates. The fire hazard severity zone map exhibits are labeled figures 1 through 8. And they're at the end of this presentation. I'll go through them one at a time. And they provide enlarged views and, of course, an overall view of the entire city area showing the fire hazard severity zones that are now mapped. The city of Oxnard has areas that are now mapped as moderate and high fire hazard severity zones. 421 parcels are now mapped in the high fire hazard severity zone, and 167 parcels are mapped in the moderate fire hazard severity zone. Fortunately, there are no areas within city boundaries that are mapped as a very high fire hazard severity zone. I want to emphasize that again. There are no areas in Oxnard mapped as a very high fire hazard severity zone. As you'll see from the maps in a moment, the fire hazards are concentrated along the Santa Clara River, along the Harbor Boulevard corridor, and the Ormond Beach areas of the city. Earlier versions of the fire hazard severity zone maps, my recollection is around 2007. It's detailed in the staff report. Was the last time these maps were updated, and they did not incorporate latest modeling techniques, the latest fire data, and the climate change and weather data that's been incorporated into this current model. And under that prior model in 2007, up until the current time, Oxnard did not have any areas mapped as a fire hazard severity zone. And again, this is because of updated climate data, modeling techniques, and fire history data. It's important to note that the city of Oxnard is required by state law to adopt these recommended fire hazard severity zone maps, specifically within 120 days of the release by the Office of the State Fire Marshal. That release occurred on March 10th, 2025, so we're on track to get the ordinance adopted in time, and we will submit a copy of that to CAL FIRE once the ordinance is adopted. The city cannot modify the maps by lessening the fire hazard. In this case, these maps, we have not increased the fire hazard severity on any parcels. Again, we cannot reduce fire hazard severity. However, there were some parcels that were affected and in a designated fire hazard severity zone. On the maps you'll see in a moment, in a few areas, the extent of that fire hazard severity zone was extended to the edge of the affected parcels. And that was only done so that those parcels were more clearly seen or could be more clearly determined which fire hazard severity zone those parcels were in. Aside from that, there was no upgrade or increase in the fire hazard severity of any parcel. On the slide to follow, there's a graphic from the Office of the State Fire Marshal that shows the requirements for different areas mapped with a given fire hazard severity zone category. And I'll go through it again once the graphic comes up, but there's a column titled LRA, which stands for the local responsibility area. That's what we want to focus on. And the severity zones are on horizontal rows that you'll see. The areas designated as high, as you'll see from the graphic in a moment, will be subjected to state laws that require specific real estate disclosure upon the sale of the property. That is from a 2019 bill, Assembly Bill 38, that requires different types of real estate disclosure starting in 2021, and some additional enhancements being triggered in July of 2025. Additionally, areas that are designated as a high fire hazard severity zone will be subject to ember resistant and ignition resistant construction techniques found in the California Building Code, Chapter 7A. Those requirements will not be in effect until January of 2026, when the next 3-year cycle of the building code adoption process becomes effective. That building code chapter 7A essentially requires new construction to follow construction techniques that are ember and ignition resistant, roofing materials, exterior siding materials, windows and doors and exterior decks, exposed eaves, things like that are addressed in that Chapter 7A of the California Building Code. From a published study, the cost impacts of construction utilizing Chapter 7A ignition and ember resistant techniques, the cost impacts range from 2 to 8% if the minimum standards are followed. That's a 2 to 8% increase in the cost of constructing a residential structure using the Chapter 7A techniques versus not using Chapter 7A. So a 2 to 8% increase using the minimum standards. But if more significant options within those standards are used, it could be up to 13%, a 13% increase in the total construction cost. This is the graphic that I described a moment ago. This is from the Office of the State Fire Marshal and ultimately from their parent organization, CAL FIRE. Again, we're looking at the right-hand side column that is under the heading LRA for local requirements, local responsibility area, excuse me. And we're looking at the rows that are in this slide colored yellow for moderate and high for orange. As you can see, in either case, either in the yellow or the orange, moderate and high categories, the city is obligated to adopt these fire hazard zone maps. And as mentioned previously, if the property is in a high fire hazard severity zone, there is a real estate hazard disclosure required by state law. And again, the construction ember and ignition resistant construction techniques delineated in Chapter 7A of the California Building Code will become effective on those properties for new construction there January 1st of 2026. I want to emphasize that those Chapter 7A construction requirements are not retroactive. Again, property owners will not have to retrofit their homes to these standards because of building code requirements. Insurance industry standards may dictate otherwise, that certain insurance benefits would result if they choose to retrofit certain parts of their home to meet these standards. But that's not mandated by Chapter 7A of the Building Code. Here's the first of eight, the first two of 8 slides, 8 figures that delineate the fire hazard severity zones in the city of Oxnard. Throughout these figures, the high fire hazard severity zone is indicated in orange color, and the yellow color indicates a moderate fire hazard severity zone. The slide on the left is the entire city, and it's kind of hard to see the detail, but at least in this view, you can see the scope of the extent throughout the entire city of the areas affected by these fire hazard severity zone maps. Figure 2 is an enlarged view of the River Park neighborhood area. You can see primarily moderate encroaching into some of the commercial properties adjoining the Santa Clara River. Moving on to the figure 3 on the left-hand side of this image, South Bank and Wagon Wheel neighborhoods. As you can see, there are areas mapped both as high in orange and moderate in yellow. These figures will be mapped in color as part of the adopted ordinance, and they will be posted on the city's website as well, not just for this agenda item, but also for long-term on our city's website for reference by our local residents. Figure 4, I'm going to take a little time here so that viewers can observe these maps. Figure 4 is the golf course neighborhood area. Ventura Road running top to bottom in that figure on the right, figure 4, and Vineyard at the very bottom of the page. So as you can see, most of the area in this graphic covered indicated as a high fire hazard severity zone, again in the orange color, is primarily the football field and golf course adjoining areas. However, there are some structures in the gallery development at the corner of Ventura and Vineyard that are indicated as, or that are mapped now as both moderate, and a number of homes are mapped now as a high fire hazard severity zone off of Thorpe Trail in this graphic. Moving on to the next two graphics. On the left, figure 5 is the Victoria Estates area. Victoria Avenue is running north, top to bottom, I should say, on this graphic. And primarily in the center of this graphic is the golf course. So you can see there are areas of both high and moderate fire hazard severity zones encroaching into the edges of the golf course. And on the left side of the graphic on Victoria Avenue, there are some high fire hazard severity zones encompassing parcels that have built structures. There's a multifamily development, farmhouse, and some other associated structures, and a commercial property with, I believe, a women's shelter. On the right-hand side, figure 6 shows the McGrath State Beach area, mostly unoccupied areas. There may be some outbuildings and structures, but again, McGrath State Beach Park is closed, I believe, at this time. And this is indicated for reference because this is within the city limits. Figure 7 on the left indicates the Oxnard Shores and Oxnard Dunes neighborhoods. You can see the area of high fire hazard severity indicated in orange, extending down across 5th Street on both sides of Harbor Boulevard. The future North Shore development is in the at the corner of Harbor and 5th. That project has not been constructed as of today. It's scheduled to be constructed in the near future, but that project will be entirely within the high fire hazard severity zone. The mobile home park south of 5th Street is entirely within the high fire hazard severity zone, as are some beachfront structures along Mandalay Beach Road, and some structures are the beachfront structures on Mandalay Beach Road, are in the moderate zone, and as are some structures in the Oxnard Shores area, as indicated on this graphic. And there's a small number of lots that are in the high fire hazard zone south of the mobile home park. Moving over to the right-hand side of this graphic, figure 8, Cypress and Southwinds neighborhood area. Again, there are some commercial areas and residential areas north of Hueneme Road that are mapped as a high fire hazard zone, and a number of multifamily and some commercial areas mapped as a moderate zone north of Hueneme Road. South of Hueneme Road, it's predominantly the high fire hazard severity zone. Of course, some city facilities are in that area, some private industrial businesses, and some commercial businesses in that area as well. Staff's recommendation is that City Council approve the first reading by title only and waive further reading of the proposed ordinance titled An Ordinance of the City of Oxnard, California, adding Chapter 14, Article 14 to the Oxnard City Code designating fire hazard severity zones. At the end of this presentation, both community development staff, myself, and Oxnard Fire Department staff will be at the first reading to answer any questions you may have.